Good morning and welcome to the Point. A lot to get to this morning, starting with Tim Greimel, the representative who is the leader of the Democrats in the House in the state of Michigan. He talks about a roads deal he does not like, accepting refugees in the state and terror threats in Michigan. Mr. Leader, let's talk about the roads deal that you've been very critical about, and we're not going to go back and rehash who said what about whom and when, but I know you weren't happy with the outcome. I know you weren't necessarily happy with the speaker and his view of your participation in those negotiations, but we are one step beyond that to the degree that the governor signed it and it's gone into place. You and former Representative, now Chairman Dillon, had some commercials that you debuted that would point out the votes of some of those Republicans who voted in favor of this, and I assume we'll see those going into the election cycle. But where are we in terms of that deal? You don't believe that there's enough meat on the bone in that plan, do you?
Well, no. The arrangement is the worst of all worlds. It raises taxes on everyday folks and middle-class families and seniors yet again after 4.5 years of other Republican tax increases on everyday folks and seniors. This birthday tax in particular, the increased registration fees are going to hit seniors particularly hard. At the same time, it jeopardizes funding for public safety and education by purportedly shifting hundreds of millions of dollars of existing budgetary dollars to the roads without even identifying where those cuts are going to come from. But worst of all, it's not even going to fix the roads because the Republican proposal isn't even phased in until the year 2021, which is 6 years from now. People in Michigan know that we need the roads fixed now, not 6 years from now. And in the meantime, our roads are going to get worse and worse every year, and that's just going to stick all Michigan residents with an even bigger tab down the road.
Is this an issue, and I pointed out the commercials, and I'm going to have one of those members that I think is going to be featured prominently in some of those commercials on next week, but is this one of the issues you see as a real talker going into the next election cycle?
Well, I think people across the state are going to be very concerned about this if they're not already, once they understand the facts, which is that this piles an ever higher burden onto them with higher taxes. It's going to jeopardize funding for other critical priorities like public safety and education. And worst of all, it doesn't even fix the roads. It doesn't even fix the underlying problem. And I do think that the concerns about this plan and this proposal are going to resonate with voters. People are fed up with politicians in Lansing pretending to solve problems. They want actual results. They want responsible government, not this kicking the can down the road. And Republicans have kicked the can down the road in two ways. They've kicked the can down the road by not fixing roads for at least another 6 years, but they've also kicked the can down the road by saying they're going to divert existing budgetary dollars to roads, but not doing that until most of the current Republican leaders are termed out of office, so that they're kicking the financial can down the road, leaving it to future legislatures to make the tough decisions about where those dollars are going to come from.
I don't want to get into your negotiating points and what you said as you were talking in those quadrant meetings, and I also don't pretend that there is a magic wand, because Republicans have control of the House and the Senate and the governor's office, and they struggled mightily coming up with a plan. But if you had that lever, if you had that control, what would your preference have been for trying to fix roads?
Well, we believe that we need a balanced approach where corporations pay their fair share towards roads. We also believe that we need to lower the truck limits, the truck weight limits, so that we have trucks doing less damage to our roads. We've got to put in place very serious long-term warranties to hold contractors accountable for fixing roads right the first time. And we need to make sure that we're holding those trucks that exceed weight limits accountable and responsible for the damage they're doing to the roads through higher fines and higher fees. We have by far the highest truck weight limits of any state in the country, far higher, about twice as high, a little more than twice as high in fact, than the vast majority of other states, including our neighbors in Ohio and Indiana and Wisconsin. And that's just unacceptable. We need to be better stewards of the roads that we have. It's not fair to just continue to pile ever higher taxes onto families and seniors to fix the roads. Corporations use the roads, heavy trucks use the roads, and they need to pay their fair share.
Let's move on to something else that I would not have bet that we would be talking about, but we all watched in horror the events in Paris over the past weekend, and we have since found out that the French authorities have been apparently successful in finding many, if not all, of those people who perpetrated those terrorist acts. And one might say, well, that's the end of the conversation to the degree that it was in Paris, it wasn't here, but it has kind of spread into Michigan on two fronts. One is the governor said he wanted stricter vetting of some of the Syrian refugees that we as a state had agreed to bring in. And two, we all are concerned about whatever existing terror threats there might be in this country. Let's start with the first, and that is the immigration part of that. The governor made a decision that other more conservative governors did, but he said he didn't necessarily want to stop the process. He wanted a better vetting process. What's your take on what the governor did?
Well, obviously, it's critically important that the federal government thoroughly and properly vet and screen all immigrants and refugees, especially from war-torn conflict zones, to make sure that no terrorists are getting into the country. We can't allow people into the country that pose security risks. Having said that, if the federal government does its job and properly vets and screens folks entering the country, Michigan and our communities in Michigan should be welcoming to new Americans, to immigrants and refugees who want to become Americans. That's what our country was founded upon. I think welcoming more people to Michigan, either from the rest of the country or from around the world, is important for our long-term economic growth and to make sure that we're increasing the prosperity of all Michiganders.
So was it a good idea for the governor to say, let's take one step back and take a look at this until we have a better idea of who these people are that are coming to this country?
Well, the state obviously does not have any direct control over
Right.
the admission of people to the United States. And certainly it's critically important that the federal government do what it has to do to properly, thoroughly vet people coming into the country. And again, I think it's true that that has to happen first and foremost. And as long as the federal government is doing that, then we should be welcoming people. But first, we need to make sure the federal government is doing that. And I think they have a very thorough vetting process in place. We need to make sure that that continues and that there aren't any loopholes in it.
When you look at the state of Michigan, and I have no idea what the numbers are, and I'm sure that there are states along the coast that have similar or larger, but Michigan really is, as are all of the United States, but even more frequently, I think you find in Michigan, this broad diversity of immigrants that have come here.
Yep.
And, you know, some are multi-generation, some of them are first generation. There are a lot of reasons that people want to come to Michigan because of the diversity of jobs and the R&D and all the different things that we offer. Because of that, we have a workforce that people like. Because of that, there are a lot of other things that we have to like. Because of that, are we more at risk from terror in this country that many people are concerned that groups like ISIS would like to perpetrate?
Well, the evidence does not suggest that we're more at risk in Michigan because of our diverse population. We have had a very diverse population for many, many decades in Michigan, including a large Arab American population, including a large Muslim population, and there have not been any significant incidents in Michigan. And I would also note that since September 11th, the United States as a whole has accepted hundreds of thousands of refugees, mostly from the Middle East. Not a single one of the refugees accepted has posed any risk of terror or any risk to national security. There has not been a single incident involving any of the hundreds of thousands of refugees accepted into the United States since September 11th.
So when you look at, and this is a little bit removed because obviously the federal government, as you rightfully pointed out a moment ago, has the vetting process, and they also have the first line of defense against any type of terror activity. But the state also accepts that responsibility within its borders and what we can do to take, you know, soft targets and make them not quite so soft. Are you concerned as a legislative leader and somebody who probably has a better track on what's going on in the state than some reporter or somebody else? Do we in Michigan need to be more vigilant given the activities that we've seen going on around the globe, or should we just be vigilant, but just continue? In other words, are you concerned that there's a heightened terror threat as we move into this holiday season?
Since September 11th, 2001, the country as a whole has been extremely vigilant. Michigan has been extremely vigilant, and rightfully so, and we need to continue to be vigilant. But I think we've been quite vigilant over the course of the past 14 years, and that's what has kept us safe here in America over the course of the past 14 years since the tragedy of September 11th. And as long as we continue that level of vigilance, we'll be fine. But we shouldn't get into assuming that because people are from a certain region or have a certain faith that they are somehow a definite security threat. Obviously, there are higher risks for folks coming from certain parts of the world, and we need to properly screen folks coming, especially, as I said, from war-torn areas. But our diversity in Michigan, as you indicated, makes us economically stronger than we would be without that diversity. We are a more appealing place for businesses to locate, for investors to come to, and we are a stronger society in Michigan because of our diversity. So we need to continue to welcome folks from around the country and around the world. Yes, they need to be properly vetted, but we need to continue to be a beacon for people from around the world who are looking for a better life.
Final question and a quick shift of gears. There are 9, 6, a handful of days in the legislative session left, depending on how it plays out. Are we going to see any significant developments out of the legislature before you break for Christmas for the holiday break?
Well, I think the one area where a lot of work is being done, including this week and next week while the legislature is out of session, is when it comes to changing the state's energy policy. This was voted out of committee in the House. I suspect that it'll be voted out of the full House in the first 2 weeks of December. I think there's some real pluses in the legislation, but there are also some concerns. We want to make sure that Michigan continues to make progress, increasing its electricity that comes from renewable sources. Most importantly, we want to make sure that electricity is reliable, that when people flip the light switch, the lights actually come on, and we need to make sure that that is the highest priority, that we're not jeopardizing that. We don't want to be in a situation that we've seen in some other states over the course of the past 10 years where there have been rolling brownouts or blackouts and things of that nature. So we've got to ensure reliability of the system, but we also want to make sure that the rate structure is fair. We should not move in the direction of having residential ratepayers subsidizing commercial or industrial ratepayers. So I think we want to make sure that we have a reliable and affordable electricity system here in Michigan. That is the highest priority.
Still ahead, U.S. Representative Tim Walberg talks to us about what happened in Paris, what should happen in the United States, and the reorganization of the majority in the House. It's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. We sat down this week to talk to U.S. Representative Tim Walberg. We started with the events in Paris. Congressman, we have to start with the events in Paris. And while this will air somewhat later in the week, we can take a look at what happened there with great empathy for the folks in Paris, but also because we've experienced, even on a larger scale, the same type of terror. What are we as the United States supposed to make of this, and what should we be doing?
Well, I think it reminds us that we are still in the battle, whether our president accepts that or not, whether he thinks that they're a JV team out there or whether he thinks that we have them contained. Frankly, you never contain ISIS, ISIL, IS, whatever you want to call them. You don't contain them, you destroy them. And ultimately they understand only one thing, and that's power. I think Putin, I think now the French administration has shown that they understand it, sadly, after a tragic event that took place this past weekend. But we can't forget the fact that there was an Egyptian plane, a Russian plane that was taken down in Egypt. There was this family in Dearborn here from Michigan that were impacted, loss of lives over in Lebanon. That's happening as a result of this contained enemy. They aren't contained. America expects our leaders to understand that. When they've now stepped up to the plate and said they're coming to Washington, D.C., we better not take them as anything less than serious. And America can be strong, it can be great, it can be safe, but it has to have a resolve that we will win the battle.
How do you win a battle against an enemy that has no country as a base. We know that they're using Syria, we know that they use Iraq, but it's not that they are in control in total in those countries, that they don't have any identified leadership, although through intelligence I'm sure we can develop some of that. But it is a guerrilla war. How do you fight that effectively, and how do you fight that effectively without creating other radicalized elements?
All right, well, I don't think we have to worry too much about creating other radicalized elements. They're going to do that on their own. I think they need to know the fear that the United States presence in the world is strong, that lines that are drawn stay drawn, and the expectations that if you cross them, you experience the results of that. I think we also keep the eyes on the ball everywhere around the world. And that's where our intelligence gathering entities have to be respected. Our civil rights in this country are certainly something that have set us apart from the rest of the world for many, many years. But that civil rights issue has to be directed in a way that the rights of our citizens are protected, and that means we do what's necessary. That sometimes may cause us some concern, and that's where a member of Congress like myself has to do the oversight necessarily from the Oversight Committee in which I sit and general member of Congress. But in the end, we are in a different world. They hate us. They hate our ideals. They hate everything about us, and especially they hate our freedom. Freedom that allows things that you and I may not like about America in certain cases, but it is America. We have these options available to us. And so an administration must be resolved to use all of the resources, the assets we have, including that of our allies that are our best friends.
When you look at the pain and suffering in the region, in Syria, in Iraq, elsewhere throughout the Middle East, and you see this flood of people coming out of that area, there can be no question that some of those people are leaving because of the deplorable conditions there. At the same time, there are concerns that some of those people leaving the area may be leaving with an ulterior motive, and as such, and I'm putting words in his mouth, so I probably should not do that, for whatever reason, Governor Snyder has said until there is a better vetting process to be able to make sure that the people coming out of that region are indeed people who want to relocate and not bring radical ideas and actions with them, that the state of Michigan will not accept those refugees. Is that the right thing to do as a benevolent humanitarian country?
Well, I think so. I think our governor, Governor Snyder, has shown the best aspects of what America is all about, what Michigan is all about, that aspect of compassion, of willingness to support, to encourage, to enable, to save where necessary, but also wisdom that says, we're living in a very difficult situation, so let's go cautiously. I think the fact that the governor has recently said, while I want to see these immigrants come to Michigan for their best interest as well as for ours, we have to do that with discretion, and with the fact of what took place in Paris and the statements that are being made and the evidence that there was some relationship with Syrian refugees, at least in name only. We have to proceed with caution, because the number one most important responsibility the governor has, and certainly the president has, or a member of Congress has, is to defend and to protect our citizens first and foremost. If we can do that and do that well, then we can offer compassion to other people in the world who genuinely need it, who are being hurt now, who are being persecuted. But many of these people will come with no background. Some don't even have birth certificates. So how do we know that we can effectively vet them without taking the time and due diligence?
I want to shift gears because we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to talk to you about the normal order of business in Washington. You and I were talking before we started this about the new Speaker of the House, Speaker Paul Ryan, but how does that impact, for example, you in your role as a congressman from Michigan? I know you're working on a number of issues, so the change in leadership, does that have a direct impact on the way Congress is going to operate?
Well, it definitely does, with personalities of speakers, but also with the willingness to squash, in the case of Paul, squash the pyramid of leadership and develop from the grassroots up. And that's what regular order is all about. I think some of my colleagues will regret the day they ever asked for a regular order. It's going to mean extra work, it's going to mean extra votes, extra hours, even as a week and a half ago when we developed the Highway Trust Fund and got it through the House, but one night went till 1:30 in the morning. Over 130 separate amendments were addressed that gave opportunity for Republicans and Democrats to try to put their mark on that piece of legislation. And I think that's a good thing. We're expected to serve our people. We're expected to represent them. This will put some of us in hotter seats because we're going to take those votes. And some of the amendments will be done for mischief, and some will be done sincerely. And my electorate will have to determine my vote on whatever issue it was, whether it was done for mischief or whether it was done to move this country forward. And that'll be a good thing. Paul is capable of doing that. He's a policy wonk in many ways. That's where he finds his greatest excitement, developing policy. But I think also by pushing it out to all of the members, he'll find the opportunity for leadership as well.
Let's talk about what you're working on in this Congress, because I know that you have some initiatives that you have been trying to develop. And where are you? Where do your interests lie as we move in to what may be the final few months of really getting anything substantive done, because there is an election looming around the corner?
Yeah. Well, I would think it would function in three specific areas: that of training for jobs and the opportunity for people to have those jobs well prepared. Secondly, to make sure that the job providers aren't overly regulated to the point of necessity, but beyond that, letting some freedom develop so they can be successful and they can supply jobs for those people, young and senior alike, to be trained or retrained for the jobs of the real world. And finally, that issue of freedom, liberty, and opportunity that comes reducing the overall size and power of a federal government. And so things like legislation that would push back on civil asset forfeiture, a great idea, but it's been abused. It's pushed people into settings where you have law enforcement agents that are given, I think, an incentive to make stops of people, to take their goods, their money, their resources, to put a hold on their assets for the benefit of the local law enforcement agency. That doesn't go well with civil rights. So those are areas I'm working in, and hopefully we'll have some success before the end of this term.
What does this look like? You've been in Washington long enough to know what the atmosphere is like. Every 24 months there is that election for office, and there is a certain amount that you have to just shove it aside and go ahead and do your work. But it does impact what happens in the halls of Congress, because people are jockeying for position. They've got primary races, they've got whatever. How much gets done in an election year?
Well, election year, generally speaking, the last year before the election is a time of a lot of vocal talk and ultimately little action coming out the end. It'll be interesting to see if the new speaker, who has cut his teeth on saying if it's the right thing to do, then stand up and do it. Do it right, of course, do it appropriately, do it wise, but nonetheless go for it. I sit in a district, as you know, Rick, that is a swing district. It has gone both ways, even during my tenure in office, where I was taken out after my first term and then had to come back and retook the seat. It is a district that isn't easy to represent, because you have to look at both sides. But in the end, you have to do the right thing relative to the Constitution, relative to your own convictions and what you've told the people you would do. I think this speaker has that same mentality, represents a district very much like mine, but has been very successful in educating his district to understand that the right thing is always the right thing to do, and so step up and do it. I would like to think that Paul Ryan will push Mitch McConnell and Harry Reid and this president during this last year. We are not living in a time right now where we can squander a year. Our budget is hurt. We have a huge debt and increasing all the time. We have an approach that's developed in the House to move toward a non-deficit spending plan, and we're well on our way to that. We can't let it go backwards.
More to the point in just a moment. All out of time. We'll see you next week. To the point.